Well, tonight, people, chapter 25 of Acts. Well, we closed with Porcius Festus in 27, and 25 opens with Festus. Now, when Festus was come in the province after 3 days, he ascended from Caesarea to Jerusalem. You know, he went up. To go from Jerusalem to Caesarea is to do what? Go down. And then the high priest, that is not right. It's the chief priest. Then the chief priest. And remember, I explained to you that every person who was head of a what? A what? A course was a what? Right. And that's what we're talking about here. There were 24 courses of priests. Then the chief priest. I like to say this too. I've often wondered, and I think perhaps I'm right on this, that of the 24 courses, each course had a chief priest, but there was one chief over the top of the chiefs. And I believe that was what happened here. And the chief of the Jews, one of the top leaders, informed him, Festus, against Paul, and besought him, begged him, sort of put the pressure on him, and desired favor to graciously consider this against Paul. That's what he was after. That Festus would send for him, for Paul, to come to where? Jerusalem. Paul was incarcerated in jail in Caesarea, some 60 miles away. Now, this chief priest and a lot of the influential men bugged Festus, the governor, to ask him to send Paul to Jerusalem, laying wait in the way to kill him. Of course, Festus didn't know that, but laying wait is making a plot, or having made a plot along the way to kill him when he came from Caesarea to Jerusalem. They had tried to kill him 2 years before, and now he's in jail for 2 years, and they're still trying to figure it out. But Festus answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, and that he himself would depart shortly thither. In other words, he's going to hasten toward Caesarea real soon. Let them, therefore, said he, which among you are able, go down with me, and if there be any wickedness in this man, accuse him. In other words, if there's any wickedness in this Paul man, you guys go on down to Caesarea, and you place your accusation. And when he had tarried among them 8 or 10 days, he, Festus, went down unto Caesarea. And the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, this is the bema, he commanded Paul to be brought. And when Paul, was come, those Jews which came down from Jerusalem stood round about. His accusers stood around him, like Paul was standing here, and then the accusers stood round about, and laid many, brought against him many grievous complaints, charges against Paul, which they could not what? Prove. Verse 8. While Paul answered for himself, neither against the law of the Jews, neither against the temple, Point 2, you see. Point 3, nor yet against Caesar, Rome, have I transgressed, offended in anything. But, verse 9, Festus, willing to do the Jews a favor, a pleasure, why Festus and everybody, Felix did the same thing. Remember, Felix wanted to do the Jews a favor, so he turned him over to Festus's regime. Now Festus wants to do them a favor. I'd fully intended to show the Corps that production that they recorded for me the other night about the Chilean ambassador who is so filled up with the politics of America that he is going to leave the United States, and he's been an ambassador of the United States to Chile. He's now moving out of the United States, giving up his home country to move away from it. Did you see that? I filmed it for you. I'm going to show it to you and show you some of the principles that are happening. What was the first half of that, Bob? That was what I wanted to see, too. You remember?
It had to do with monitoring money.
That's it. That they snoop over all your checks in the bank. They know exactly what checks you're writing, to whom, when, and so forth. They can go into any bank and check up on you anytime they want to. That was also it. I thought it'd be good for you to see it sometime. Maybe when you ain't so tired, we'll do it sometime. Someday. Festus, willing to do the Jews a pleasure, answered Paul and said, Wilt thou go up to Jerusalem, and there be judged of these things before me? Now, how in the world is Paul going to be judged of Festus in Jerusalem and get a fairer trial in Jerusalem than he would get in Caesarea in front of Festus? He's trying to do the Jews a what? Yeah. Then said Paul, I am standing at Caesar's judgment seat. In other words, I'm here in Caesarea at Caesar's judgment seat. This is the Roman law. I'm a Roman. I'm standing here where I ought to be judged, not by those birds in Jerusalem. To the Jews have I done no wrong, as thou very well knowest, because in one of these chapters he had heard this and he knew it. Festus did. 4, verse 11. If I be an offender or have committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. But if there be none of these things whereof these accuse me, then no man may deliver me unto them. I appeal unto Caesar. That was sort of something. One would have thought that Paul wouldn't have had to appeal to Caesar because, first of all, Felix knew Paul hadn't done anything wrong. Left him in jail for 2 years. Festus came along and Festus knew he had done nothing wrong. And yet, in order to please people, they kept him locked up, kept pushing him. So they finally wanted to push him back to Jerusalem. And I do not know if Festus knew about the plot against Paul if he came back to Jerusalem. But Paul said, look, I'm not going back to Jerusalem. No man may deliver me unto them. I appeal unto Caesar. This was a Roman citizen's right, that he could appeal to the highest court in the land if the need were there. And that's exactly what he did here. He appealed and said, I am going to want to go to Rome. Then Festus, when he had conferred with the consul, that consul is not the Sanhedrin. These are the chiefs of staff. Is that what you call them in cabinet? Cabinet. These are the cabinet members of the governor's household, so to speak. When he had conferred with the chief officers of the government, the cabinet, I believe Festus really wanted to send him back to Jerusalem. And after he conferred with his chief officers, he comes back with this reply, Hast thou appealed unto Caesar? Unto Caesar shalt thou go. In other words, that's where he made the decision. Since you made the appeal to Caesar, now you're going to go see Caesar. That means go to Rome. Now after certain days, verse 13, King Agrippa and Bernice came unto Caesarea to salute or pay their respects to Festus. Because Festus had just come into office, and the protocol called for that when King Agrippa was in the area, he'd stop by and welcome him into the office. And I think I told you, didn't I, that Festus only ruled for 2 years. Perhaps 60, 62. Perhaps Bollinger gives you information on Agrippa and Bernice, but Agrippa, this is Agrippa the second. His father was Agrippa the first, who died that untimely death in Caesarea. Worms ate him up. And his great-grandfather was King Herod the first. This was the great Herod line that had such an influence at the birth of Christ, previous and following. King Agrippa II is the last of the children. And Bernice is his sister. Bernice was married to somebody else, and then he died, and then Bernice came to live with her brother, and then she married Vespasian's son, Titus. I think she married Titus, and she didn't like the way he did things, so she left him and came back with her brother. And according to Josephus and the historical record, in either 99 or 100 A.D., Herod Agrippa II died in Rome. His sister had some previous time before this been taken by the emperor or something in Rome, and the people were so mad about it he never did get to marry her. But she was a beauty. And that's Bernice. Josephus said that they had illicit sexual relations. I think it was Josephus who said that. But she's quite a gal. Well, anyways, Agrippa II and Bernice were sister and brother. And they came to Caesarea to salute or to pay their respects, the court, the protocol, to Festus, who was the new governor of the province. And when they had been there many days, which means, 3, 4, 5, Festus declared Paul's cause unto the king. I think the reason he did this is because King Agrippa was a confessing Judaist by religion. In other words, the Herod group all were Jews, so to speak, as far as religion is concerned. And perhaps Festus thought he knew a lot more about the Jewish religion than he did. But on the other hand, I think Festus was looking for a way to either get rid of Paul and get it from a higher authority, keep his own skirts clean. I don't know for sure. But it's interesting that he would discuss the case, not discuss the case with Herod Agrippa II, but that he would bring Paul forth to appear before Herod, which he does. Festus declared Paul's cause unto the king, saying, there's a certain man left in jail here in bonds by Felix, about whom when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and elders of the Jews informed me, desiring. The word desiring is way too weak. It's asking almost in the sense of demanding. Look, we've slipped you so much money under the table, or we've done this and so forth to you. We've now therefore. Asking that he be condemned is the text. Condemned to death. That's what they were asking for. The word judgment is the word condemnation. That he be condemned, or condemnation, against him to death. In other words, what the Jews asked for is that either Festus condemn him to death, or that Festus send him from Caesarea to Jerusalem. One of those two things is what they were asking for. And he tells Agrippa, to whom I answered, it is not the custom of the Romans to deliver any man. To die is scratched. Because that he which is accused have the accusers face to face, and have license or permission to answer for himself concerning the accusation laid against him. Not the crime, the accusation. Festus was not nearly as cruel as Felix was. At least Festus had a little respect for Roman law. And this is straight Roman law 16. Therefore, verse 17, when they were come hither without any delay, on the morrow I sat on the judgment seat, the bema, and commanded the man, that's Paul, the one, to be brought forth, against whom, when the accusers stood up, they brought no charge of such things as I supposed they would. He was expecting them to really have something concrete for him to put his teeth into to make the decision of condemnation. But they didn't have it. But had certain questions against him of their own superstition, and of a certain Jesus which was dead, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. That's really something. Couldn't accuse him of anything except certain questions against him of their own superstition. I'm sure Festus never said superstition, because Herod Agrippa II was a Jew. And if he'd have said, if Festus would have said of your superstition, that just wouldn't have been nice protocol. He said, of their own religion, and of a certain Jesus. Doesn't say one Jesus, of a certain Jesus. There were many Jesuses, you know that. The word Jesus means what? Savior. And anybody saved anybody at any time was a Jesus. So there were many Jesuses. This one, he said, Festus, which was dead, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. Up until this point, Agrippa could go right along, because being Jewish in background, naturally he'd be informed about the messianic promises, and that a Messiah was coming, he could understand. But when he hit this about this Jesus fella, Jesus man, who was dead, whom Paul affirms to be alive, now we're into a new thought with Agrippa. And because I was doubtful how to inquire hereof, I doubted of such manner of questions, I asked him whether he'd go up to Jerusalem and there be judged of these matters. Now Festus should have known the cards were stacked, and he did. But he's trying to do the Jews a what? That's exactly it. Man will do so many stupid things just to get other men to favor him. But when Paul had appealed to be kept reserved unto the examination, or hearing his examination by Augustus, that's the emperor. The man's name was not Augustus, but because of the greatness of the Roman Empire, the Caesars were referred to as Augustuses or as Caesar. Nero's the emperor at this time. When Paul heads to Rome, what he appealed to was Nero. Can you imagine appealing to go to Caesar? Well, he wouldn't have any less chance than he would with Festus, that's for sure. Boy, how this whole thing keeps building. I commanded him to be kept till I might send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said unto Festus, I would also hear the man myself. I'd like to meet him, hear him. Why Agrippa wanted to personally see Paul, I have no idea. Maybe curiosity, maybe because he claimed that the Messiah had come and therefore died and resurrected. I don't know. But old King Agrippa had something up his sleeve. Tomorrow, said Festus, you'll hear him. I'll bring him out. Therefore, on the morrow, verse 23, when Agrippa was come, and Bernice, with great pomp, and was entered in the place of hearing, the place where the examination was to take place, and they would have these raised daises that they'd sit on. They all came in with their fancy garb on, their doctor's degree robes, and all of that stuff. It was a real gala affair. All the king was all dressed up, crowned, and the queen in her duflanges. So it was real neat. With the chief captains and principal men of the city, at Festus' commandment, Paul, then after they were all in, Paul was brought in handcuffed to a soldier. And Festus said, King Agrippa and all men which are here present with us, you see this man, about whom all the multitude of the Jews have complained, have dealt with me, have complained about, both at Jerusalem and also here in Caesarea, crying. They didn't cry. They just, you kill him. He ought to be killed. Not to live any longer. They wanted, really, to have him executed. But, 25, when I found that he had committed nothing worthy of death, and that he himself had appealed to Caesar or to Augustus, I have determined to send him. Of whom I have no certain thing to write unto my Lord. How would the Trinitarian boys like to handle that one? Here Caesar is called Lord. That's right. And whenever a governor sent a prisoner to Caesar, he had to send with him, why have you indicted him? What are the accusations against him? And Festus had nothing to write, because everything they accused Paul of was of their own religion, and Rome wasn't interested in a religion. Only if a Roman religion, only if a Jewish religious leader would go against Rome leadership, politically, then they would object. So he had nothing to write. And I believe that's one more reason why he wanted to sit with Agrippa, to see what Agrippa, the king, would come up with, which would carry even more weight than his, that he could put in a little letter and send to Nero. Wherefore I have brought him forth before you, and specially before thee, O King Agrippa, that after examination I might have somewhat to write. See? For it seemeth to me unreasonable to send a prisoner, and not withal to signify the charges laid against him. Well, it just wasn't done.